So I'm going to speak about low impact development maintenance in the context of the Yarra Ranges Council, where I work as a water sensitive urban design officer. And apologies if I use the word WSUD in my presentation rather than LID, which is the term that I'm a bit more familiar with. So in terms of the session plan, I'm going to speak remind us of with an overview and a different perspective than the previous presentation on the Little Stringy Bark Creek project, LSC project, and its collaboration with Yarra Ranges Council. I'm going to then talk about the maintenance milestone to give an overview and an understanding of the journey that we went through since the inception of the project. And I'm going to then speak about the maintenance arrangement, which are upcoming for the next financial year, 16-17. I'll then reflect on the past challenges that we've been able to address and the current ones that we're still remaining with and trying to address in the next couple of months, years. I will then talk about the successes and lessons learned from this journey. In terms of the Little Stringy Bark Creek project, and that's my slide number 3, Andrea touched on it. The overall objective, research objective, was to see whether it was possible to restore, using some stormwater retention measures, the Little Stringy Bark Creek, a degraded stream, in Mount Evelyn, Victoria. And so that led to the implementation of hundreds of water-sensitive urban design systems over the past 8 years, really, when the first one was put in the ground. As Andrea talked about in her presentation at the beginning, on private land, and then I'm going to focus a bit more on public land ones. The project has been recognized at the international level and invited to become a UNESCO International Hydrological Demonstration Project. And what I wanted just to highlight was the project structure. So Melbourne Water, the Water Authority, together with federal and state government funding the project, and the Melbourne University leading the planning and channeling the funding to different stakeholders, and in particular Yarra Ranges Council, who's looking at the implementation of the project, Storm Consulting, looking at helping out with the design, and Yarra Ranges Council, and that's of interest for our presentation, looking at being responsible for maintenance, monitoring and evaluation, which in partnership with Melbourne University. And slide 4, in terms of the maintenance milestones, so 2008 is when I understand I was not involved in this process, but the first systems in the ground in terms of private on private land. 2010 is when the first systems on public land were put in the ground. 2011 is when the first written memorandum of understanding has happened between the Little Stringy Bark Creek team and the Yarra Ranges Council. It was a pretty simple agreement, but highlighting some of for the first time, the requirements and starting the conversation about the requirements for maintenance for this systems with a bit more detail. And 2012 is the agreement is followed by some financial support from the LSC project team to council, in particular to maintain the gross pollutant traps, which are assets requiring more money because it is contracted out from our perspective. And so yeah, 2015 is when I joined. Basically, it's fair to say that the maintenance was and still happening on an ad hoc or reactive basis. But there's been a very interesting milestone for late last year in terms of retrofitting all the rain gardens from that were on public land with, and you can see the photos on the left-hand side here, where all the rock inlets, difficult to maintain for the teams, were replaced with this sediment tray, capturing all the sediments before they reach the filter media in the rain gardens. And that has led to facilitate all the maintenance. A maintenance proposal was then submitted from the Little Stringybark Creek team to Yarra Ranges end of 2015, and that has led to the situation that we are currently in and will be implementing in 2016, where a dedicated WSUD item was added to the council's operational budget, and that means that there's a possibility of co-funding being signed while we speak between council and the LSC team for the next 3 years of a maintenance program. So that's where we're at. And I just want to moving to slide number 5, to explain what is this maintenance system that we are developing at the moment. So the big novelty is this WSUD maintenance officer, which will be sitting in one of the 2 maintenance teams, the Parks and Bushland team. At Yarra Ranges Council, we've got the other part of the maintenance, the civil maintenance team, and this WSUD maintenance officer will have work in close collaboration with the civil maintenance sitting through a system of requests that we can log. It's called the pathway request system. And it's sitting in a team of gardeners because of the set of skills which is necessary for their tasks. It will also be supported by the WSUD officer from a training perspective when required, but also from a monitoring and reporting perspective. On the next slide, I just highlighted the schedule that we'll be working on with monthly activities and annual activities. So basically, in this 3 years arrangement, we're talking about maintenance of the assets 4 times a year minimum. That's the red ticks every 3 months, and an additional 4 times based on large rain events. There's also the annual activities by the end of our financial year with some monitoring, replanting because that's the right season, and annual reporting. I wanted to highlight on the next slide some of the maintenance constraints that have influenced the impact, or that have had an impact on the way we have designed, but also we have to maintain the systems. And the quite high slopes in the Dandenong areas is something that influences the way we have to manage the system with high velocities entering the systems. The gravel and roads and driveways are also something which is, different from an urban environment, for example, or very urban environment, which means that we have to think carefully to that in our design and maintenance plan in terms of the treatment train for when we design WSUD systems. And finally, in terms of tree and foliage also, this is something you can see on the bottom picture there, quite a large amount that we have to deal with, which can be low compared to urban systems, which might have a bit less of this issue. I'm moving on to the previous challenges that we've been able to address. So, and all these challenges have obviously in the context of our seminar, slowed down the adoption of WSUD from a maintenance perspective. So in terms of institutional challenges, the fact that WSUD sits across these 2 teams that I've described, the civil maintenance team on one side and the green maintenance on the other side, and it meant that we had to reconciliate the different ways of working, pretty same council, but pretty different ways of working, and that's something that has inhibited, I think, some of the uptake. Just not knowing what the new structure would be, basically. There was also no dedicated WSUD resource, so in terms of people, but also budget. So any resource allocated to WSUD would be part of a drainage pool, basically, which means that it didn't focus in particular on trying to solve WSUD issues, and that has been identified as a challenge, hence this additional budget line now created and person. And what I wanted to highlight is the fact that it was not a WSUD only issue. Based on the asset management plan that we have a picture here on the right-hand side, and done very recently, the insufficient budget for maintenance was an overall issue, and so it was really trying to address the bigger picture rather than trying to solve only the WSUD situation. Some other limiting factors on the next slide is, so from the Little Stringy Bark Creek project, I think it's fair to say there's been initial discontinued levels of ownership with, for example, different WSUD officers in the role over the years, but with interruptions in between. So letting the momentum created sort of drop off, and then these issues of maintenance which have been tackled, you know, in a continuous way, not being able to be addressed adequately. So that's one of the factors. The other one is for council's project, for example, some of the past projects have created this negative feedback loop, and that's what I'm explaining in the diagram below. So the a poor planning and or design and or construction of the systems has led to assets being hard to maintain, which in turn has been leading to a reduced appetite for WSUD, and that's where we can see the link between this maintenance issues and the adoption of WSUD more generally at council. On the left-hand side here, there's a few photos of a planning and design issue where the rain garden is straight after a big culvert, and basically the garden being washed out after every single rain, the water not being filtered at all and going straight in the traditional overflow and drainage pit system. The second one at the bottom with some construction issues where all the clay, or in a very clay environment, the material, the soil dug up from the filter media was just left on the side on the batters, and this has led to a very unfavorable plant environment for the growth. In terms of current challenges, the remaining challenges that we have to address are the fact that we are pretty good at accessing some capital funding and works through grants. However, they're not associated with maintenance issues. So that's where we can see that, well, for the 3 next years, we're going to be able to cover these maintenance costs, but what's next? And that's something we have to be addressing. So successes and lessons learned on the next slide. From a structure point of view, we have found it useful to have a WSUD steering committee made out of or composed with managers and executive officers, and a working group at a more operational level. So all of them being used at various stages of this journey to help answer some of these high-level questions or more operational level questions, and that's been working really well. Another is this role of the WSUD officer, which has created the link between the 2 maintenance teams, but also other teams like the construction one. And it initially was sitting in the environmental team, but was found to have a pretty interesting influence and impact in the infrastructure team. So in terms of processes, there's been some really interesting review meetings and feedback process from the maintenance team at the design stage, and that has led to, as I was mentioning before, this retrofitting of all the rain gardens in an unsealed road environment. And also in terms of the batters, them not being planted, but rather planted with grass rather than vegetation, to diminish the maintenance needs and allow them to be mowed. So that's some of the maintenance feedback which we found quite useful. Finally, in terms of communication and risk management, we have had an increased level of details of the conversation about maintenance over the last few years, And that has led to this pretty detailed proposal that I was mentioning for the next 3 years, where we're able to identify some pretty specific schedules, but also like funding or funding requirement for the next 3 years. And that's been, you know, a great outcome of this journey. The last the second one is the great effort which has been put on communicating evidence-based successes from the LSC project, and that's been invaluable for council to be able to use that and to address this negative perception that I was talking about from some of the past projects. That goes together with the risk which we've been able to address of not maintaining the assets, and that raised by several councillors. So putting this political pressure, I guess, has helped keeping the maintenance issue high on the agenda. And as a conclusion, just wanted to say that some of the past challenges have definitely slowed down the adoption of WSUD in the Yarra ranges. Some temporary arrangement has been found for the next 3 years with this core funding with the Little Stringy Bark Creek project or team. And yeah, however, in terms of the long-term perspective, we still haven't found this sustainable model of funding. And we need to be doing that with all the stakeholders involved in waterways management in Victoria. So thank you. That's all for my presentation, and happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions before our next speaker. Stephanie, any questions for Stephanie?
Yeah, hi, Stephanie. This is Brandon at UCLA. It's really interesting to hear about the maintenance, and I was particularly interested in the fact that you are now planting grass around those biofilters. I visited those a few times, and I'd noticed that they were pretty, they had a lot of varying conditions around the biofilters. I wondered inside the biofilters if vegetation that could be pruned or mowed or harvested was being considered for future biofilters, because we're kind of looking at the benefits of how harvesting can improve the biofilter performance. I wonder if you can comment on maybe some of the vegetation changes within the biofilters, if that's something you were looking at.
Yeah, no, thanks. It's true that at the moment we actually have considered only the batters, just based on all this research done by the FOB in the FOB study, and the idea being that all these carex and other plants that we're putting in the biofilter have been proven in terms of their performance. However, I know there's a lot of research, and we'd be very keen to be part of that with other councils to develop what they're calling at the moment the ZAM WSUD, another acronym, so the Zero Additional Maintenance Water Sensitive Urban Design. And I think they were trialing some specific type of grass which hopefully would have a similar performance than the. But I think at the moment we have been using the literature and using these Caris and Juncus and other plants which have been proven as efficient.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, with the maintenance schedules, you don't have any maintenance to actually prune the plants within the biofilters, do you?
No, we do. Sorry. It was a very quick summary of the tasks. The list is actually much longer, and we do so not too much, but we are trying to keep it. It's from a performance, but also from an aesthetic point of view. Communities keen to, and we have a team of gardeners looking at how that can be integrated as well as possible in the landscape, and so that's definitely a task that the WSUD maintenance officer will be undertaking.
Excellent. I know we'll have some more questions and opportunity for discussion during the roundtable session. Let's go ahead and move to our next speaker.